nail it, right? Like you're getting on these shows. This helps, right? Like think about it, long game. The better you do on these shows, podcasters know each other, right? Like content creators are friends with other content creators. The better you do, the better chance that one podcast is going to turn to more than one podcast. So one of the biggest things that you got to understand is that when people are listening to podcasts, they're often multitasking, right? So very rarely do you get the full undivided attention of someone for a whole episode. Generally what they're doing something else. And there's like these punches of 3 to 6 minutes where they're really dialed in, and then they dial out a little bit else, and then they get back in, right? So like you want to have this shot clock in your head of your speaking points. If you've been speaking nonstop for 12, 15 minutes without the host interjecting, you've likely already lost the listener, right? It's really, really hard to keep someone's attention for that long without rambling. So keep a shot clock in your head, 3 to 6 minutes before you take a little pause, allow the host to get back in, right? Like these people that are following this podcast love the host, right? They generally have a relationship with the host already. So the more that you let the host speak, the better that you're going to allow them to like build affection to you, because it's that host's validation that's the first thing that's going to get you in the door with them, right? So keep that in your head, this like 3 to 6 minute timer that if you're speaking for too long, look for a way to stop, right? And then when you're speaking, we talked about this last week in the evangelizing, right? It is to prove a point, you want to frame it in a way that's easy to understand. The what, so what, now what structure is how I like to think of these things, right? Like you introduce this idea of you want to get on podcasts, but you want people to listen to you, and they listen in 3 to 6 minutes segments. So you need to, that's the what. So what, you need to come up with a framework that allows you to contextualize speaking points into like a full lesson. I call it the what, so what, now what. It's the way that I'm doing this thing right now. And if you can, name the thing that you're going to talk about, explain how it works, and then now what prompts somebody to like develop it on their own, or what their next step is going to be, then you are wrapping it into this like nice bow, right? So this like what you're talking about, like what you're solving for. So what is how you do it or how you learn to do it. And then now what is how someone can go do it for themselves, or any other way that they can look at it. That's the way that you wrap your ideas into a 3 to 6 minute speaking point. I go a lot into this in last week's episode. So if you haven't listened to that, go check that out. The how to become an evangelist. We go deep into the what, so what, now what, and all the other ways that you create speaking points. But that's a really, really good way to just limit yourself to not ramble for too long, right? Like figure out, if you've already described what you're doing, figure out what the next thing is that somebody needs to do, and then kick it over to the host. And then finally, a couple of finishing moves. 2 things that podcasters love when you do, and I know this from experience because people do it with me and I do it with other people, is kicking it back to the podcaster, right? If you can think of like one great question to ask the host, and intersect that somewhere in there, right? Like you're going to be talking for the majority of the time, but if you can find one really good moment to be like, when they're talking to you, just be like, yeah, well, what do you think, man? How have you done this? And allow them to interject their own experiences. You're going to gain a lot of favor with the host. You're going to gain a lot of favor with the audience as well. Because like I said, the audience already buys into that host. Another thing that gets you a lot of favor. I got this from Donnie Boyven. At the end of every podcast he's on, when he's like, all right, when the podcaster allows you to promote yourself, you're like, listen, before I promote myself, I got to say, this person puts a ton of work into this podcast. It's awesome. Look how great of a host she is. If you haven't already rated this podcast, shared it with somebody else, or, like told a friend about it, I mean, you really got to do that first before you come check me out. I'm sure you've listened to other podcasts by this person. Check this person out, man. The host's eyes light up and they remember you forever, right? So do that. You're going to get to promote yourself all episode long, but when you're nearing the end and they ask you to promote yourself, first promote them and tell their audience to go like leave a rating and review. You have a friend for life in that host.